All right, so get this. Today we are going deep, deep, deep into a question that you guys have been asking about. What is love, really? Like, what is it? So we found this article from Very Well Mind. It's called, Do You Know What Love Really Is?
Mm.
And they throw out this thought, and I want to get your take on it. Is love actually like a secondhand emotion? Now, to help us break all of this down, we've got our expert here who is amazing at untangling complicated feelings, which I think this is...
Oh, yeah, ready to jump into this. I mean, love is one of those things we talk about constantly, but we never really, like, sit down and think, okay, what is this thing?
Exactly. So the article starts with, like, the basics, the definition. Love is a complex set of emotions and behaviors involving intimacy, passion, commitment, all these things that we kind of know, right? But then it throws in this quote, and this is what really got me on click. It says, love is a physiological motivation such as hunger, thirst, sleep, and sex drive.
Mm.
So is love something we are driven to, not just something we feel? I don't know, what do you think about that?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's a very interesting comparison, right? I think it gets at the heart of this whole nature versus nurture debate we have around love. Like, is it biological? Is it hardwired? Or is it something that we learn and develop through culture and our experiences?
Right.
I think the article suggests it's probably a little bit of both. But what's interesting is that even with all this research, we still can't quite put our finger on exactly what love is.
Yeah. And to make things even more confusing, the article then goes on to compare love to just plain liking someone. And they bring up this guy, Zick Rubin, who came up with something called the scales of liking and loving.
Okay.
He basically found that romantic love really rests on three main things: attachment, caring, and intimacy. And here's what I thought was so interesting. Rubin says that caring for somebody is actually a much stronger predictor of whether you love them than whether you just like them. So you can really like somebody, enjoy spending time with them, but if you don't genuinely care about their happiness as much as your own, is it even really love?
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
It makes you think about, I mean, if you think about it, it kind of suggests that true love goes beyond, just enjoying someone's company on a surface level. It's about really investing in their happiness, caring about their well-being as much as you care about your own.
Yes.
And that makes you think about your own relationships, right?
Yeah.
Think about the people you're closest to. Do you see that element of deep caring in those relationships?
For sure. And I think it also gets at the fact that love isn't just one single thing. Because the article goes on to list all these different types of love, like friendship, infatuation, passionate love, compassionate love, even unrequited love, that one that nobody wants to talk about.
Right, exactly.
Like this whole spectrum, right?
It is. And I think understanding these different shades of love, it can help us figure out what we're feeling and why we're feeling it.
Yeah.
Like, are you caught up in that initial excitement of passionate love, or is it that more like settled, comfortable feeling of compassionate love? They feel totally different, don't they?
They really do. Oh, and then the article briefly mentioned this idea of twin flames, which I thought was interesting, but they kind of glossed over it. Maybe that's a deep dive for another time.
Definitely, that's a whole other conversation. But for now, let's stick with what they didn't dive into, which was Sternberg's triangular theory of love.
Okay, yeah, this is like the classic love theory. We've got intimacy, passion, commitment. But I always get confused about how these things actually come together to create different types of love.
Yeah, I think that's where the triangle part comes in. So think of it this way. Each of those components, intimacy, passion, commitment, they're like the corners of a triangle. And depending on which of those corners is like the strongest in a particular relationship, you get a different type of love.
Okay.
So for example, if intimacy is really high, but passion and commitment are kind of low, you might just have a really close friendship.
Right.
But if all three of those things are strong, like really firing on all cylinders, that's what Sternberg calls consummate love. It's kind of like the ultimate ideal love,
So it's helpful to know where you fall on that triangle. But the article also gets into how love actually affects us, like physically and mentally.
Right, it does. It talks about all this research that shows people in loving relationships tend to be healthier overall.
Yeah.
Like lower risk of heart disease, they handle stress better, they might even live longer.
Which makes me think about my own life. There's no doubt that the relationships I have with people I'm close to, that love has a huge impact on how I feel overall. Have you noticed that in your own life? How has love, for better or worse, kind of shaped your health?
Oh, for sure, yeah. It's pretty powerful, the impact of love. But you know what I actually found surprising in this article? It says that, like, love as a topic of scientific study is actually kind of new.
Wait, really? I would have thought that philosophers, scientists, they'd have been debating love for, like, centuries.
You would think, right. But it seems like it was mostly, Poets, playwrights, they were the ones grappling with love. The article even quotes Sigmund Freud, who basically said that scientists back in the day were too busy with other things to even bother with something as, like, messy and complicated as love.
Oh, wow. So love was too frivolous for serious research, huh?
Apparently so.
That's so wild to think about. When did that change?
Well, okay, get this. The article says that even in the 1970s, there was this, like, pushback against studying love. This U.S. senator actually criticized researchers for using taxpayer money to study love. He thought it was, like, totally unimportant.
Oh, wow. I mean, that just blows my mind because today we are like bombarded with research on love and relationships. It's hard to even imagine a time when it wasn't a serious topic of study.
Yeah, it really is. It just shows you how much our understanding has evolved, I guess.
Yeah.
But luckily, those researchers kept at it, and now we know so much more about how love affects, well, pretty much everything, like from child development to adult well-being. It's crazy.
And I'm sure all that research is part of the reason that the public perception of love has changed so much. Once you start seeing all this like hard evidence
Mm.
that love actually has an impact on our health and well-being, it's kind of hard to dismiss it as just some fluffy feeling. You know what I mean?
Totally. It's like science finally caught up with what, artists and poets have been saying forever,
Right.
that love is actually this powerful force in our lives.
Yeah. So we've gone from like love as this purely artistic or philosophical concept to love as something that can be like scientifically studied. It's pretty amazing.
It is. It really makes you think about all the different ways we experience love and how we express it. All those types of love that the article mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. From friendship to infatuation to romantic love. What if we dig into some of those a bit? Maybe even share some of our own stories.
I'm up for that if you are. I think it could really bring these concepts to life.
Yeah.
And maybe even spark some ideas for our listeners.
Totally. Okay, let's start with friendship. It may not be the most like glamorous type of love, but it's the foundation for so many of our relationships, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that make friendship so special? What do you think?
For me, it's that feeling of like shared history. Having that mutual understanding with someone. A true friend is someone who just gets you, accepts you for who you are, and is there for you no matter what. Like a chosen family almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's an element of trust, too. You can tell a friend anything.
Yeah.
And they won't judge you.
Right, exactly. And I think that sense of safety and acceptance, it's so important for letting us just be ourselves. It's like having the space where you can completely let your guard down and just be.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think that's why having strong friendships is so essential for, like, even for romantic relationships. Because if you don't have that baseline of trust and understanding with your partner, it's hard to work through all the challenges that come up.
I completely agree. Being able to laugh together, cry together, support each other through all the ups and downs, that's what makes love last.
Yeah, and speaking of lasting love, let's talk about that initial spark of attraction, that feeling of being totally smitten with someone, infatuation.
Oh, yeah.
The article defines it as like intense attraction,
Yeah.
but not necessarily having that commitment yet.
Right, exactly. It's all about that rush of excitement, the butterflies.
It's like a drug almost, right? You get that dopamine hit when you're around the person you're infatuated with.
It's true. I mean, there's a reason they call it falling in love. You're just swept off your feet by this intense attraction.
Yes, but the article also mentions that infatuation can be fleeting. Sometimes it just disappears as quickly as it came.
Yeah.
Especially if it's not based on anything real or substantial. Have you ever felt that?
Right.
That sudden, like, drop from cloud nine when you realize the person you were so infatuated with isn't who you thought they were?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's like those rose-colored glasses just shatter, and you're left thinking, what was I even thinking?
Uh-huh. It's true. But sometimes infatuation can actually grow into something deeper, right?
That's what we hope for, right? That initial spark can turn into a flame that burns brighter and steadier over time.
Exactly. Which brings us to, I think, what most people think of when they think of love. Passionate love. That intense, all-consuming feeling we see in movies and songs.
Yeah, that's the one. Where you just can't get enough of each other, want to spend every minute together.
And there's usually a strong physical attraction, too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, you're under a spell, nothing else matters.
But the article points out that passionate love can also be kind of blinding. There's that tendency to idealize the other person, to see them as perfect.
Right, and that can be both good and bad, I think. It's great to see the best in someone, but you have to eventually see them for who they really are, flaws and all, though.
Absolutely. Nobody's perfect. And accepting each other's imperfections, that's a big part of what makes a relationship strong, right?
It is.
And I think that's where compassionate love comes in.
Yes. This is the type of love that's built on, a strong foundation of friendship, trust, intimacy. It's about truly knowing each other, accepting both the good and the bad, and being there for each other through everything.
It's definitely a quieter kind of love than passionate love, but it's no less powerful, in fact.
Yeah.
I'd say it's even more powerful because it's based on such a deep connection.
I totally agree. It's the kind of love that can truly last a lifetime. It's interesting, though. The article doesn't really talk about unrequited love in this whole section about stages of love.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
It's almost like they're saying it's not real love.
It's weird, right? Because unrequited love can be so painful. But I still think it's a valid form of love, don't you? It shows that you're capable of deep feeling, even if those feelings aren't returned.
Absolutely. And I think going through that, it can teach you a lot about yourself, your needs, your boundaries. Sometimes even heartbreak can make you stronger in the end.
Yeah, it's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah.
And speaking of learning and growing, I think it's time to get back to that big question the article posed at the beginning. Is love really just a secondhand emotion?
Let's do it.
That's a question that makes you think, that's for sure. And I think it gets to the heart of what love really is.
Yeah.
I bet our listeners are ready to hear what we've come up with. So buckle up, everyone, because we're about to go deep into the nature of love itself. All right, so we're back, and we're finally going to tackle this idea of love being a secondhand emotion. What do you think they mean by that?
It's tricky, right? I think what the article's trying to say is maybe love isn't actually a basic emotion, like, in the same way that joy or sadness are.
So it's not something we're just, like, born with.
Right, exactly. Like not pre-programmed to feel it from day one. The article suggests it's more like a combination of different things, like a blend of other emotions, thoughts, even cultural influences.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's probably why love can feel so different for everybody, right? And even for ourselves at different points in our lives.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't know, maybe like a recipe or something.
I like that.
Different ingredients, different amounts, and you end up with all these different flavors of love.
Okay, so what are some of the ingredients in this love recipe? We talked about joy being a big one, that feeling of connection.
Yeah, and excitement, right, that anticipation. But it's not all sunshine and roses, is it?
No, definitely not. Love can be messy and complicated.
Absolutely. I think trust is a huge part of it. And that often means working through things like fear and insecurity. And let's not forget about anger, when we feel hurt by someone we love.
Wow, so it really is a whole mix of emotions.
Right, it's like a tapestry, woven from all these different threads, both the light and the dark ones.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it makes me think about one type of love that the article didn't really touch on much. Self-love. We've been talking about love for other people this whole time. But what about love for ourselves? Where does that fit in?
Oh, I think self-love is so important. It's like the foundation for every other kind of love.
Right.
If you don't have that sense of your own worth, it's hard to really give and receive love in a healthy way.
Yeah, totally. It's like trying to fill up someone else's cup when yours is empty.
Exactly. Self-love means being kind to yourself, accepting your flaws, celebrating what makes you you. And it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, and it can be tough sometimes,
Right.
right? Especially with all the messages we get telling us we're not good enough, not thin enough, not successful enough.
It's true. That's why it's so important to tune out that noise and focus on what really matters. You deserve love, just as you are.
So if love is this mix of emotions, thoughts, even cultural stuff, maybe the real question isn't what is love, but what does love mean to me?
I love that, because at the end of the day, love is personal. We all experience it and define it in our own ways.
It's shaped by our own unique journeys.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to the whole secondhand emotion thing. Maybe it's not about putting love in a box and labeling it. It's more about understanding how it shows up in our lives, how it motivates us, how it challenges us.
And ultimately how it connects us to one another.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into love, we want you to think about what love means to you. How do you experience it? How do you express it? And most importantly, how can you cultivate more love in your life? For yourself and for others.
Because love is what makes us human, right? It's what gives our lives meaning and purpose. So go out there and love fiercely, love authentically, and don't hold back.
That's beautiful. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of love. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into something that matters.